Good morning, and we come today to finalize the series of the Ten Commandments, the moral law of God that is set out for us in Exodus chapter 20 and also in the book of Deuteronomy as well. So when we come to the last of a series, we've got to not only deal with what the particular subject is, but we've also got to, in a sense, recap to what has happened before it. There would be an awful lot in that, rather than to say that when we consider of how the Ten Commandments is constructed, that there is a very real sense that they're every bit as applicable today as they were the day that they were written. Anyone that denies the Ten Commandments by saying, for example, that God reveals to the individual heart and soul his way, doesn't fully understand what is meant by the moral law. We can snatch things out of the air, as it were, that we say that God has revealed to us, and the bottom line is, if those things are in sin, if they're a sinful nature, well then they're not of God. There's two things about it. First of all, it's not of God, and secondly, it proves that the Ten Commandments is applicable in this day and age, because there is a thing called sin. It's a huge problem in society. It's a huge problem even in churches in this day and age. I remember many years ago that about a man who supposedly was given a testimony, and he gave a testimony to say that God had told him to leave his wife. Now, when you hear things like that, there is something that is very, very wrong. And certainly within his testimony, it would be hard pressed to prove that that was biblical in any way. But when we come to the 10th commandment and try to summarize everything that we have talked about over the last few weeks in the other 9 commandments, and we consider what the 10th commandment says, you'll maybe understand to why there's an order to these things, and why they're divided into 2 different groups, or obedience and our dedication to God, and our obedience and dedication to man. And the 10th commandment reads, "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbour's house, thou shalt not covet thy neighbour's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is in thy neighbour's, that is thy neighbour's." The reference to neighbours there is not necessarily the person that lives next door to us or across from us or whatever, but those that we come into contact with, those that we know, those that we visit with, those that we work with, and so on. The word covet here, the old-fashioned English dictionary, to quote the meaning, is simply to delight yourself in something, but in an unlawful way. And the unlawful bit there is to the intent of breaking the law as it is within your country. The Hebrew expression of the word covet has two entirely different meanings. Really, depending what it's applied to. The first one is that you can have a delight in something, or you can simply have a lust for something. Now, when you consider the latter, as this reference covet here in the 10th commandment means, you can see how it could very well lead to the breaking of a number of other commandments. Thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, and so on. And the other thing that's significant about this commandment is particularly detailed. And even though the detail is somewhat old-fashioned, yet it's still very applicable to this day. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbour's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbour's wife. Something completely different. Nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbour's. Now, before we take a brief look at this, just those parts of it and what they're relevant to us in this day and age, I want to read some scripture to you, other than the 10th commandment itself. First of all, in Hebrews 13, verse 5, let your conversations be without covetousness, and be content with such things as ye have. For he has said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. There we have, let your conversation be without covetousness. Do not express to others, I wish I had, or whatever. Or something that you have seen that is, I wish I had my neighbour's house, or the man I work with, I wish I had his car, or whatever. Be content with such things as we have. Very hard to do that, in a sense, in this modern day that we live in, to be content with what we have. But there's a reason for that contentment. For he has said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. I think we always need to keep that before us. Then, all these, interestingly enough, all these references are in New Testament. First Timothy, chapter 6, verses 8 to 11, I will read. 6, verse 8. Now, having food and raiment, let us be therewith content. You'll notice the basis of that. Having food and raiment, let us be therewith content. But they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts. Let me repeat that. But they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some covet after, they have erred from the faith, and pierces themselves through with many sorrows. But thou, O man of God, flee these things, and follow after righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, meekness. When I say that this last commandment, this 10th commandment, can indeed summarize and include a lot of the other commandments, you can see where it's going there. It starts with the eye. It starts with coveting something that is particularly attractive to us, and it can lead to all these other things. But rather, follow after righteousness I emphasize the righteousness because it's the righteousness of Christ, godliness, faith, love, patience, meekness. Then we'll go back to Galatians, the book of Galatians in the chapter 5, in the verse 25. If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. Let us not be raised over vain glory, provoking one another, envying one another. Again, something that we should be very clear upon, and something that we should obviously avoid. In Luke's Gospel, in the chapter 12, Luke's Gospel in the chapter 12, and we have a very clear word here, verse 15, and this is the word of Jesus himself, and he said unto them, take heed and beware of covetousness, for a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of things which he possesses. Man's life consisteth not in the abundance of things which he possesses. So there we have the words of Jesus himself, and that is something that we really need to concentrate upon. The worldly man and woman in this day and age fails to understand that man's life consisteth not in the abundance of things which he possesses. It's what we possess in our heart, and this is why the moral law is so important. It's why we know that God has a standard. God has a way for us. There is no unclean thing that enters heaven. So just to deal with the detail of this particular commandment, thou shalt not covet thy neighbour's house. There we have material things that seem attractive to us, and houses are the thing that we live in on this side of Jordan, as it were, and while we are on this earth. We may move house a few times or whatever, but that's usually a choice of location for work or whatever. But the idea of even buying a house that you can't afford because we really like the house, that's foolishness, really. And thou shalt not covet thy neighbour's house. We live in an absolutely beautiful house, but the Lord gave it to us. Lovely house. And here we'll stay until the Lord tells us to go somewhere else. And so it doesn't only include houses. The very fact it mentions a house, it means it's material things. And the world is, through its advertising, through its advancements in technology and so on, is so good at making us want to buy, to gain other things that are attracted to us. Like, as some of you know, I play a bit of golf, and golf equipment companies, it's supposed to be every 2 years, but it seems like every year, release brand new equipment, and the whole hype and the whole energy of the thing is that this will improve your game. In some cases that might be true, but in the vast majority of it, it's just so that you change everything, so that you spend money, so that you have the latest to show off to whoever you're playing with or so on. And it is a lot of hype. And that's only one example. It's the same in things like motor cars, it's the same in technology things, electronic things. It is incredibly easy to covet such things. But then the commandment goes on to say, thou shalt not covet thy neighbour's wife. And that just brings us back to the seventh commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery. That just leads directly to the other, as it were. Also says, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant. We believe that this is slightly different from coveting his wife, in that if a particular man that we know has a manservant and a maidservant, it illustrates to us that he is well-to-do, he's rich. Consequently, he has these people. And we think to ourselves, well, if we had a manservant, if we had a maidservant, how much more free time we would have to do the things that we want to do. And again, we would stretch ourselves to gain those things and to not live a proper and humble life in Christ. It also says, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbour's. The ox and the ass here are instruments of manufacture, maybe would be a good word to describe it. They're instruments of work. Ploughing, you're milling corn or whatever is the reference there. Whereas we have maybe a more labour-intensive way of doing such things. If you want to modernise that, even within the realms of farming, you know, a bigger plough, a bigger tractor, a bigger combine harvester than your neighbour or whatever. And you can see where all this is going when the thing that you have is perfectly adequate. Yes, sometimes you have to change these things if you can afford them. Sometimes the Lord will provide you with those things that you need. But the thing that is relevant here, that you don't covet, you don't lust after these things. And it finally says, and anything that is thy neighbour's, anything that you basically see in life that you covet is wrong, because it can lead indeed to other things. The requirement within this commandment really is to require the full contentment with our own condition